November 24th, 2001. On the outskirts of the small town of Enderby, British Columbia, Derk and Audrey Rolfsema are settling down in their quiet, warm farmhouse after a long day's work out in the cold. But little do they know that the night will end in tragedy.
One quick look at this particular crime scene and you would think whoever did this did so in anger.
A close-knit community searches for answers as the hunt for a suspect gets underway.
Now they're on a timeline to make sure that they do not have a serial killer on their hands. Who was this individual that has done such a horrific event?
And as time drags on, one thing becomes clear.
Somebody knows this farm, whoever did this.
Nestled in the North Okanagan region of British Columbia, the small town of Enderby is one of the province's best-kept secrets. About 5.5 hours northeast of Vancouver, the charming community is home to approximately 2,900 residents, with most working in agriculture.
Everybody knows everybody. There's a Deep Creek Hall, everybody went for Christmas concerts.
It's a small farming community. Everybody knows each other. Basically, we're all working hard on the farm.
Life in Enderby is considered low-key, far from big city pressures. Like most small towns, none of its residents want to believe that the worst could happen to them or one of their neighbors. However, violent crimes can happen anywhere, and Enderby, unfortunately, is no exception.
If you're looking at random homicides, typically the big cities, the large urban areas, have slightly higher rate because in a small town, everybody knows each other. The odds of having something like that happen are substantially diminished. But if we're talking about intimate partner relationships, domestic violence situations, the motivating factors when we're looking at homicides, they're the same. Things like jealousy and financial issues, those strong emotional responses to life events, they occur both in the big city and in the small towns.
48-year-old Derk Rolfsema and his wife Audrey, 3 years his senior at 51, live on the outskirts of town, on a small farm in an idyllic area of the Okanagan.
The kids loved it. We always sent the kids out to the farm because that's where Derk was running the farm and milking the cows, and they loved to be out there.
It's absolutely beautiful. I loved going there, loved the farm. If I had to, when my parents would go to the Okanagan, I'd ask to go to my uncle's because it was just always something that I loved to do.
That farm operated very efficiently, and there was hard-working family, period. Everybody had their chores to do and things to do at the farm.
My brother's farmed since day one, obviously. All of us as kids, we had to work hard because you live on a dairy farm. Everything was manual labor. You work and you get up and you work.
After years of tireless days working on the family dairy farm, a couple sell their livestock, opting instead to look after llamas as they ready for a new chapter in their lives, retirement.
My brother had the dairy farm. He took over the farm from my dad, and I worked for him, and we all kind of pitched in for years, and he decided to retire.
Married only 5 years earlier, with no children and the first marriage for both, Derk and Audrey find joy in the simpler things in life. Derk enjoys camping, fishing, and anything involving the outdoors, while Audrey adores animals, playing cards with friends, spinning, and weaving.
Derk and Audrey just got married a couple years prior to the incident, so she wasn't in our family for a long, long time.
Audrey often finds herself in the company of friends at the local Spinners and Weavers Club. Born in Vancouver, she grew up with 3 brothers and a passion for the outdoors. Later in life, she meets Derk and moves to Deep Creek, just outside of Enderby, onto the Roelfsema family farm. Here, her love of animals flourishes, as does her joy of knitting. Though retirement finds itself on the horizon, Derk Roelfsema can't help but continue to work long hours on the farm that's been in his family for over 50 years. A farm full of memories that he and his 2 brothers will cherish forever. Like any family, tensions sometimes run high between siblings, but the Roelfsemas are otherwise a close group, one that always have each other's backs.
One of my favorite memories of my uncle is he'd come get us in his little red car, and in Armstrong and Deep Creek, the roads are like this, and he would just like give her, and then it'd make your stomach go into your throat. And at Christmas, he would put on an amazing like hayride, like tractor and all that, and put hay bales on it, and he'd get everybody in the community. This is how small we were. And we would all go up in the bush and we'd sing and like have hot chocolate. He always made sure that us kids had an amazing time when we were there.
The Roelfsema property features expansive farmland, too much for Derk and Audrey to maintain on their own, so they rent out a portion to nearby neighbors who are also farmers. Not only does this provide Derk and Audrey with income during the slower months, it also grants Derk the opportunity to keep busy. He often finds himself at his neighbors, helping out around their farms where he can.
The one thing about Derk is that they could count on him like clockwork. If he said he was going to be there, he'd be there, and they didn't have to worry about the job being done properly because he was very, very efficient in what he did. When it came to a question, if you had something, you go to Derk and he'd find the solution for you. He was very smart.
The property also includes a small guest house, which the Roelfsemas lease out to farmhands in need of a place to stay. With their last tenant moving out, the guest house is now ready to receive someone new.
He rented that out to a hired hand that worked for another farmer up above. And there's another farm that had quite a bit of cattle, so he used to be a hired hand for them. His name was Renee Terrian.
Derk and Audrey's friends know that they can call on either of them if they ever find themselves in need. They're known in the community for their generosity and their easygoing personalities, which makes what happens the night of November 24th, 2001, even more disturbing than it already is.
I mean, when this all happened, everybody was locking their doors, right? Because they thought, what the heck, in Little Deep Creek, how can this be?
The day begins like any other. Derk and Audrey go about their routines, tending to their guest house that's been sitting unoccupied since their previous tenant moved out several months before, all the while helping out their neighbors. As the sun sets and the darkness takes over, they retreat inside their home. They enjoy each other's company while winding down, ready to do it all again come morning. But the arrival of an unexpected visitor changes everything. And for Derk and Audrey, the morning will never come. The winter days come and go, and life in Enderby continues on as though nothing's happened, because no one has any reason to believe otherwise. Friends and family spend a week calling the Roelfsema household, but to no avail.
That whole week, my mom was supposed to get help from Audrey to go see a doctor, so she didn't tell, that was a Monday, I think, and she didn't tell me anything about it till about a Wednesday, and said that, you know, Mr. Reimer, he said he couldn't believe, you know, where was Derk?
He was working for a farmer down the road, and he called and said that Derk's didn't show up, and I thought, well, that's not Derk.
He doesn't, unless he's sick, but he will always make sure there's a phone call or something, and he's there. He's a very, very reliable person on the farms.
It's one of those people that he says he's gonna be there, he's gonna be there. And anyway, he called, and basically, I knew it was weird, because he's usually on time.
They know how busy Derk and Audrey can get, so everyone assumes the couple will reach out when they have a free moment. But that day never comes. the family asks a friend to go check on the house.
Go by the farm, and he says, well, the door's locked. And nobody locks their doors in Deep Creek. Everybody leaves their doors open, unless you're going away maybe for a few days.
It isn't until Derk and Audrey fail to show for a dinner that one friend decides enough is enough. He goes to the farm and investigates for himself. Little does he know what he's about to witness. Enderby, British Columbia, a sleepy farming community nestled in the North Okanagan. While the small town's economy is driven by agriculture, the area still offers plenty of activities for lovers of the great outdoors, from snowmobiling and ice fishing in the winter to hiking the Enderby cliffs and spending days on the beach during the summer. It's a place where everyone knows their neighbors, and that's no exception for Derk and Audrey Rolfsema, a semi-retired farming couple. They live on the outskirts of town, near Deep Creek, and are well-liked by everyone they come in contact with. Audrey keeps her social calendar busy with the local knitting club, and Derk spends his day working with the Deep Creek Farmers Institute.
You know, they're retired now, and Audrey had some llamas, and, you know, that was her thing in the garden, and my brother did fishing and hiking and motorbiking, and, you know, it was kind of a daily routine, and have supper at 5 o'clock, and you finished, and watch the news. You know, it was a typical day in Deep Creek.
But on the night of November 24th, 2001, everything changes when an unexpected visitor comes by the farm and forces their way inside the Rolfsema's household. This is the last time anyone sees Derk and Audrey alive. After the couple fail to show for a dinner, a close friend takes it upon himself to check in, horribly unaware of the discovery he's about to make. There, on the living room floor, he discovers the bodies of Derk and Audrey Rolfsema. They've been bound by duct tape, shot, and stabbed. RCMP major crime units from Kelowna and Kamloops rush over. They immediately begin working together, assessing the vicious scene, making note of every piece of evidence, no matter how big or small.
When a detective or an investigator first arrives at a crime scene, the first thing they really want to do is take an overall view of what's been going on, what looks like it's out of place. Immediate things that are seen are obviously, you know, if there's blood, where that blood is located, are there any broken windows, point of entry or point of exit may be obvious, you know, like if the door has been kicked in.
When forensic specialists come to the scene, they're looking for sort of a definitive timeline. When did this all occur? Lividity, rigor mortis, and decomposition do play into effect and give us sort of a timeline or a clock to say how long an individual has been deceased at a scene. And in this case, it was approximately 1 week to be November the 24th.
On the floor, Derk Rolfsema was covered with a blanket. He had been shot, and there was evidence that a knife was also involved. Derk's brother, Barry, is brought in to help officers determine exactly what might have been missing or out of place in the home.
They asked me if I could come to the house and look around and see what I see, and the carpet was already ripped up, but it was all a blood stain all over the place. And so I looked around, and obviously I could see that this happened just after dinner, because there was dishes that were washed but just put in sitting there still drying on their own, and I noticed that the butcher knives were all gone. So I go look around the farm. Somebody took gas out of the fuel tank that we have there and left the hose hanging down. I could see the tracks going from our neighbor's farm over to there, and you could see how the grass, I went like this with the snow and looked at it, was all the grass was pushed one way. I told the police, look at this.
As the crime scene begins to reveal its secrets, investigators also discover that the bodies have been doused in gasoline, and that a curling iron is plugged in nearby with a piece of fabric placed on top of it. The curling iron was connected to a timer, which was intentionally set to turn on at a future time. They can only assume that the assailant or assailants meant to burn the house down after the slayings. but that the curling iron's failsafe prevented that plan from materializing.
And, of course, he's trying to, say he's in another place when it burnt down, but it never did burn down. I guess it just doesn't work.
If that house had burned down, there wouldn't be a real tough time for the police department to get any evidence.
Due to the fact that a firearm was involved, there were several shells that were found on the floor.
In brutal murders like this one, you have to wonder whether or not it's premeditated or if it was really just a crime of passion.
At the time looking at it, I don't see any major things taken. To me, looking around, I didn't see, the TVs weren't missing or, the major appliances of any sort that was missing. That was my first comment. Somebody knows this farm, whoever did this.
Investigators also find that Audrey's car is missing. They believe the perpetrator could have taken it and immediately put out the word for the community to keep their eyes open, without alerting them to the crime that's been committed.
They told us the car was missing. Would you know where the car is? And we said, well, we really don't know. We don't. Obviously, those two are in the house, so somebody else took the car. I'm assuming whoever did the homicide, right? Killed two people to steal a Honda Civic. That's not logical to me,
For specific reasons, police often have to play their cards close to their chest.
Police can't give very much information. They don't want to give anything out because obviously that inhibits their investigation.
Investigators very often will not reveal all the information that's known to them about the crime or even about the suspect. Very often the purpose of this is to be able to gauge whether somebody is telling the truth about what happened. If they're a witness or if they happen to be dealing with the suspect, one would presume only the suspect would know certain things about the crime scene. So that holdback information, as it's known, is a tool that investigators use to determine whether a witness is reliable or whether a suspect may be telling the truth.
Authorities notify family and lifelong friends with the tragic news. It tears through those closest to Derk and Audrey like a hurricane, ripping them apart.
I got a phone call from my brother-in-law, Foster-Roelfsema, and basically he had told me, because he didn't want to tell his sister directly, so I got the word of what happened there at the farm. And it was so shocking, because we knew the couple and we couldn't figure out who possibly would want to murder a couple like that. And it just blew us away. So I had told my wife, of course, then she was thrown into a loop because it was her older brother that had just been shot and his wife. And the sad part of the whole picture was Audrey came into Derk's life late. Like they hadn't been together all that long and they're just starting to really enjoy themselves. Like they're starting to get out and do things and camp and travel. They were robbed of a life, a good life.
I think one of the most difficult things that any police officer can do is notify a family that a loved one has died. It becomes even more difficult to try to explain to them that their life was taken, that they were murdered. It wasn't just some accident. For every family, obviously, the shock of hearing the news, most people aren't able to comprehend exactly what's being said in that moment. It doesn't take long before they start to ask a lot of questions. Very often those questions can't be answered by the person making the notification. It's just too early on in the investigation.
You only hear about this in the big cities, right? You don't see this in the smaller towns.
But word spreads quickly about the murders, causing the town to immediately fear the worst. Could there be a killer on the loose in Enderby?
Who would do this? Was this a robbery that went wrong? Or because we can't think any other reason, and what it did do, it threw the whole valley, Deep Creek Valley, upside down because everybody was locking their doors all of a sudden from a community that basically didn't have to worry about that. They didn't know if they had a serial killer in the loose.
It's not unusual for there to be a lot of fear amongst members of the community, particularly in a small town where these types of events are not routinely seen. So the fact that they'd be worried that they may be in danger, that's a perfectly natural response. So making an effort to let everybody know that they are not in danger, that this was likely a targeted event and it wasn't just a random crime, would it help to alleviate some of those fears. But ultimately the best thing is to locate the suspect, make an arrest. That would certainly reassure the community that the police are looking after their best interests.
You know, the police said it's not just a random act of somebody just going in a house and killing 2 people. Basically, it's targeted. So that, you know, helped a lot of people, but...
Everybody was really scared. They were shocked, they were scared. People had baseball bats by their door and by their beds, and just not knowing, you know, why. They were a nice couple.
Also, when you think of the family and what they're going through, having somebody arrested and held accountable for the death of their family member, that goes a long way in bringing closure for the family, which is very often difficult to come by.
Police reassure the frightened community that there's no danger to them. They believe this is an isolated incident. However, that's all the information they give, other than the notice to look out for Audrey's black car. They believe the vehicle could be the key to solving the case.
We're all looking for the car, because they needed the car, basically for DNA evidence, I'm assuming, you know.
Large searches are done by search and rescue and by teams to try to locate that vehicle within the immediate area.
Search and rescue had a big day of doing that, and we went all over Deep Creek to go look for it, and unsuccessful, of course.
As local and provincial authorities work together to track down a suspect, the town and its surrounding neighbors hold a service of remembrance at a local chapel, where many friends and mourners gather to remember Derk and Audrey as they once were. The generous, free-spirited couple with a love for the outdoors and for their friends and family. Months pass. The families of both Derk and Audrey wait for a break in the case. A suspect, the discovery of Audrey's car, anything, but nothing is found, and police remain silent.
They leave you out there. They can't give you any information. We understand all that. So, of course, they got leads all over the place, so they're following all these leads, and they're trying to do their thing.
We're left out in the outside of it while the police did their investigations. People had all kinds of ideas. Of course, it's going to happen because people they're scared. Because, you know, because this a valley like that never had anything happen like that, all of a sudden gets thrown into this where it's a double homicide. And not just an accidental one, a brutal one.
All seems lost until a fragment of DNA is pulled from the duct tape recovered at the scene. Tests show that it doesn't belong to Derk or Audrey. It belongs to someone else. But there's a problem. Police have no immediate suspects.
The important factor is now that they're on a timeline to make sure that they do not have a serial killer on their hands, is that who was this individual that has done such a horrific event to these 2 victims?
You know, we don't know exactly who it is. I mean, you're always looking, because we didn't know anything about Audrey's past. You know, because they married kind of late in life, and so does she have a past? You know, that was the only thing that I did not know.
Forensics needs to find a DNA match.
December 2nd, 2001. Family and friends of farming couple Derk and Audrey Rolfsema haven't heard from them in over a week, something that is out of character for the neighborly husband and wife. After the couple failed to show for a dinner, a close friend takes it upon himself to check in, horribly unaware of the discovery he's about to make. Inside the house, he finds the lifeless bodies of Derk and Audrey. They've been bound by duct tape, shot, stabbed, and doused in gasoline. The investigation begins, but with 0 suspects, no motives, and few clues, police find themselves grasping at straws. That is, until a small fragment of DNA evidence is pulled from the duct tape used to bind the couple. Tests reveal that the DNA doesn't match Derk or Audrey, but someone else. Someone police have yet to identify.
DNA is very unique to an individual, and when it is obtained as evidence, there is very little margin of error matching it to a suspect.
Armed with this evidence, RCMP narrow down their list of several persons of interest and bring in Derk's older brother, Kurt, for questioning. Considered the black sheep of the family, Derk's eldest brother is high on the list of potential suspects.
It's usually the family and friends or acquaintances are the ones that do the murders, and 80 or 90% is the way it is. So we're all suspects, of course, which makes sense.
Is it possible that family is behind this vicious double homicide? And could the slayings be financially motivated?
Early years, he was drinking and driving, and I think he was with some wrong people and whatnot, but, you know, he was a black sheep. He was always doing things like when he was at the farm, he would never help us with haying because he had other things he'd like to do, so.
Anyway, he wasn't willing to give his DNA, so of course the ears perk up more for the police to say, why won't you give the DNA?
Derk's family grant police permission to speak with Derk and Audrey's bank. From there, investigators are able to see if any of the Rolfsema's bank cards have been used in the past week. Shockingly, the answer is yes. The investigation team went to businesses along the main Highway 97 to collect possible evidence that may be on video surveillance. Ultimately, it did pay dividends.
Audrey's bank card was used at an ATM, and the ATM surveillance camera was able to capture images of a person who used the card. Now, the picture that was captured wasn't the greatest quality, but it does reveal it's a male wearing a mask.
And my brother gave the wrong PIN number out, and Audrey did not, by the way.
Got her to give him the bank PIN number and went down to Armstrong and tried to pull out money with this weird mask-looking thing on his face.
Following the trail of the bank cards, investigators also uncover surveillance footage from a nearby convenience store. Shortly after Audrey's bank card is used at an ATM in the early morning hours of November 25th, her credit card is also used. Authorities immediately search the footage and find a man who they believe to be a potential suspect. However, one thing is for certain in reviewing the footage. The man is not Kurt Rolfsema, confirmed by the fact that this time the individual was not wearing a mask. Still, Kurt agrees to provide a DNA sample to prove without a doubt that he has nothing to do with the violent crime. The results are negative. Kurt Rolfsema is cleared as a suspect. Investigators move down their list of possible suspects, starting with Derk's neighbor. They question him about his rental of Derk's land and if he noticed anything suspicious in the days leading up to the double homicide. He says he hasn't. It seems like another dead end, until authorities bring up a rumor that's been floating around town, one that could be damning if true. The rumor claims that the farmer's been approached by a biker gang, and that the gang is interested in using the Rolfsema land for an illegal marijuana grow-op.
At the time we were looking at this crime, marijuana was illegal in the province of British Columbia, so criminal gangs found a number of ways to be able to grow the product in order to continue their criminal enterprises. So they were pretty ingenious in the sense that because of British Columbia's climate, they are able to actually grow the crops outdoors and hide them in farmers' field amongst other crops, making it very difficult for law enforcement to detect.
Maybe Derk had gone into the bush. He liked cutting his own firewood and bringing it down to the farm because he brought a lot of wood through the house. That maybe he had seen something. This is the only thing we could think of. That he had seen something to do with illegal marijuana grow-ops or something that he had seen, and someone had seen him being there and come back to deal with it, so he would silence him. That's the only thing we could think of.
Could a gang have visited the Rolfsema home on the night of November 24th, 2001, with the intent of coercing the couple into signing over their land? Or did Derk's neighbor approach him about the deal, but Derk refused, leading the gang to seek retribution?
We heard all kinds of crazy stories, and those people do not want to create heat. They don't want the police. They do not want to be murdering people because the police will come down on them.
There was people pointing fingers at everybody else because that's all they could do, because no one knew the actual answers of what was taking place. So they point fingers because they just want it solved. They want their small Deep Creek town to go back to the way it was.
Derk's neighbor denies any involvement in the crime and the rumor about the biker gang. With no solid evidence to back the claim up, investigators find themselves back at the drawing board. That is, until the neighbor mentions one other person worth looking into. Someone who left the Rolfsema farm on bad terms. Someone with a grudge against Derk. Derk and Audrey's former tenant, Renee Therian. When Derk and Audrey Rolfsema's bodies are discovered in their British Columbia home, Friends, family, and investigators are baffled. The couple have no known enemies, no one who wants to do them harm. They live in a small town and enjoy small comforts, including their llamas and their love of the outdoors. So who is behind this heinous crime, and what could possibly be the motive? One possible theory involves a biker gang rumored to want to occupy some of Derk's farmland for an illegal marijuana grow-op. However, Derk's neighbor, who leases the land, tells police there's no truth to that statement. With a lack of evidence, no positive matches to the DNA sample found at the scene, or any leads into where Audrey's stolen vehicle may be, the investigation nears a standstill, until the neighbor points authorities to a suspect who's been under their noses all along. Derk and Audrey rent the small guest house on their property to farmhands, which at one time included their former employee, 32-year-old Quebec native Rene Therian. While the local farmers know who he is, Therian is someone new to police. Armed with a DNA sample and some surveillance footage from the convenience store, they begin canvassing the area with hope of finding Therian and positively identifying him. An officer at the Salmon Arm RCMP detachment looks at the image and immediately identifies him as an acquaintance from the French-Canadian community. She IDs him as Rene Therian. Investigators now have their main suspect. They confirm with Derk's brother Barry that Therian is indeed the former tenant of Derk and Audrey's, and that the two had an argument months before over an incident with the guest house freezing over, leading to Therian's eviction from the Rolfsema farm.
We heard it as Derk was coming down the lane. He noticed the windows were fogged up. So he thought, he phoned the farmer above to find out where Rene was. And he said, well, he's not here. He's on holidays down in Quebec with his family. So Derk went in to check it out, and it was low on furnace oil, so he basically topped it up. And the pipes luckily didn't freeze.
He has the right of doing this, obviously, because everything was frozen. I mean, but when Rene came back, he was so mad at my brother for doing this.
He was quite upset that Derk had gone into the property without his permission, which in one way it's Derk's property, so he has the right to go in there if something is wrong.
And Rene and my brother, ever since that day, according to Audrey, that, you know, they never got along very well after that, from that day on.
But is their argument heated enough to result in murder? Police also learn that Therian owns a unique-looking firearm that many neighbors have seen during his time working in the area.
Well, it was a special gun. There was only I believe there was only 5 or 6 in Canada. And the gun was very rare. And they tracked this gun to the previous owner. The previous owner sold it to Rene.
It was a Calico, and it was a semi-automatic rifle. But I don't know whether he hunted. Well, why he would want to have a gun like that in the first place is questionable. But that's what took out Derk and Audrey. That's what put them in the ground.
Police are quick to see if the casings retrieved at the crime scene match the ammunition from this weapon. It turns out that this Calico rifle's firing pin produces distinct markings on the shell.
Shell casings that were obtained as evidence at the scene were assessed by a ballistic expert, and they were found to have unique patterns on them. And from those unique patterns, they matched a gun that was owned by the suspect.
Police bring Rene in for questioning. He admits that he and Derk had an altercation that led to Rene being evicted from the Rolfsema farm several months earlier, but he denies any involvement in the murders. Still building their case against him, police allow Therian to leave, but not without taking a DNA sample.
There's a very different environment when you're obtaining a DNA sample for evidence or a DNA sample just from an individual that has participated willingly. A DNA sample at a scene is done by a forensic expert who does a very meticulous process in obtaining that sample. When you're obtaining a sample from a willing participant of a DNA, you could just as simply have them open up their mouth, and you can take a sterile swab and just swirl it around their cheek, and there you have it. You've obtained a sample of their DNA.
The forensics team compares the unknown DNA sample taken from the crime scene to Rene Therian's. Much to their surprise, it's a perfect match.
Even though the investigators in this case have some substantial evidence and there are a number of very good witnesses, their prime focus at this time is making sure that they've covered everything. They don't want a possible piece of information to come up after the fact that may derail the prosecution. They want to ensure that there's no doubt whatsoever that this person is guilty of the offense.
The fact is, there are still lingering doubts about the true motive of the crime.
I can't see how someone could brutally murder two people over a conflict of a rental. It's just too much for me to deal with. So I knew there had to be something else involved in this.
A lot of people think there's another person involved.
As concrete as the evidence against Therian may seem, his arrest at this time may still be premature if authorities suspect he may have been acting on the orders of another. Therefore, they may want to keep him under surveillance to gather additional evidence. Further raising suspicion, Therian suddenly leaves his well-paying job and moves back to his home province of Quebec.
Rene quits his job, and he's gone. He's leaving already. Like, he's on the run, as far as I'm concerned.
Though he now lives in a different province, investigators secretly move in on Therian. Over the next year and a half, authorities from British Columbia and Quebec work together on an undercover sting, also known as Mr. Big, to try and capture a confession from their prime suspect and possible information of anyone else involved.
The idea of a Mr. Big operation involves multiple undercover police officers posing as potential criminals, and they try to entice the suspect into joining their criminal organization. And part of, the evolution of these operations is to get this suspect to confess to something that they may have done, either to impress Mr. Big, the leader of the criminal organization, or as a way of convincing that person that they can be trustworthy. So very often, Mr. Big would demand that the suspect reveal details of something that they have done, that they have heard through rumors, for example, and try to get a confession. Now, all this would be recorded by the undercover operators who are, in and amongst this supposed criminal organization. They would then have to convince a court that they obtained this information legally.
The operation fails to lead to revelations of an additional suspect. However, Therian does admit to Mr. Big his personal connection in the killing. In October 2003, Therian returns to British Columbia and leads investigators posing as criminals to Audrey's missing vehicle, which he dumped down an embankment not far from the Roelfsema property. The discovery is a major piece of the puzzle. Lodged under a tree, it was basically hidden from aerial view or even view from the road.
That car was maybe a half a kilometer from the rescue center of where it was, and we drove right by it, but because this car was black and he went over the ravine a little bit, the black car we never spotted it. I mean, we were out there with snowmobiles, so very close to the farm. 3 miles away. He basically, in the big sting operation, said where the vehicle was, everything. I mean, he's got DNA on him, they got everything, yes.
Finally, on October 3rd, 2003, more than 2 years after the brutal slayings of Derk and Audrey Roelfsema, Rene Therian is arrested at a gas station in Kelowna, British Columbia. Authorities quickly interrogate Therian one final time to corroborate his version of events, and the results are the same. He confesses to the murders of Derk and Audrey, and is formally charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder.
First-degree murder is generally a murder where there's some evidence of premeditation or planning. In Canada, first-degree murder carries a mandatory life sentence without the possibility of parole for 25 years.
With Rene Therian now in custody for confessing to the murder, the case seems to be on track. However, a possible slip from the police department threatens to derail the years of investigative and undercover work that's brought everyone to this moment. Therian's lawyers argue that their client is pressured into confessing, and that his confession breaches his charter rights because police did not give him a meaningful opportunity to retain French-speaking counsel.
Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms forms a part of the Canadian Constitution, and it guarantees everyone accused of a crime upon arrest the right to instruct and receive advice from counsel as soon as possible. If René Thérien requests a French lawyer because his first language is French and he doesn't get that opportunity, his charter rights could be impinged on, and his statement could therefore be inadmissible.
The court has to rule before the actual hearing on whether or not the case can proceed in what's called a voir dire.
A voir dire is a trial within a trial. So often what voir dires are focused on is the admissibility of evidence. So what we're dealing with here is a voir dire to determine whether or not René Thérien's statement is admissible in court. That's a separate ruling made by a judge, so even in a trial where there is a jury, the jury is excluded from the courtroom and not present during a voir dire.
Luckily, the court rules in the police's favor. Thérien's confession can be submitted as evidence against him. In 2006, during the second week of his trial, René Thérien pleads guilty to murdering Derk and Audrey Rolfsema. The charges against him are lessened to second-degree murder. He's sentenced to life in prison without eligibility of parole for 18 years. However, at the time of filming, it's reported that the courts have deemed Thérien eligible for parole.
Well, I'm very disgusted in the parole board. You don't know until you go through this. Yes, they got all these rules, but you know what? The criminal has all the rights. The victims have no rights, as far as I'm concerned.
Before he goes out on parole, it was like a year early, they started him. And, you know, just not knowing anything and not getting help with how everything works was really difficult for us.
Like, he is now out of jail in Canada. They released him as of November the 4th. And what I found there is the fact that I read the documentation, I think they dropped the ball on this one. They're really disappointed with the prison system. The reason why is I saw that a year ago, he still had an issue with control. And that's what got him in trouble in the first place, because he felt Derk was controlling him. And he had an issue with one of his counselors. So instead of making him deal with that counselor, they gave him another one. And to me, that's wrong.
Though the outcome of this senseless tragedy remains open-ended, the town of Enderby and its neighbors have persevered.
I think more people lock their doors now, for sure, where they never did before.
Adding to the sense of unease is the nagging feeling that the true reason for the crime is still unproven.
We really never did get a motive. And he even said himself, he doesn't really know why. Something really strange bothers us still, my wife and I both, is every time they're talking about Derk and this and that and some other people, he comes up, did my boss buy the land? I said, why would he be questioning, did my boss buy the land? Like I knew the farm was available because Derk was gone and Audrey were gone. But we still think there's a problem there because the fact that it's something we don't know about, because when someone's being charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder, he's more concerned of who's buying the property than dealing with what he's done. So I don't know.
Is there someone else out there who's eluded ultimate responsibility?
I cannot say it over the camera, but the guy knows who he is. René's coming for you. He's out. The parole board said he can't leave Quebec, but the police said he couldn't murder 2 people. He's coming for you.
Derk and Audrey touched the lives of many in the small community.
One thing that Derk did all the time was he made sure that me and my brother had an amazing time when we went there. And Audrey, she was amazing at what she did with the llama wool and all of that, and making sure that we always felt welcome.
Their friends, their families, their neighbors all keep the couple alive in their memories, as well as in their hearts.